I always imagined that if my Lamborghini HOA Karen ever met an untimely demise, it would be with me behind the wheel and maybe on a private track, pushing the limits just a hair too far. What I never anticipated was it being turned into twisted scrap metal by a zit-faced teenager trying to impress his equally clueless buddies. Even worse, that teenager turned out to be the son of our nightmare HOA President Karen. And just when I thought things couldn't get more surreal, Karen, in all her puffed-up, self-righteous grandeur, actually had the nerve to insist that I cover the damages. Her reasoning? It's your car, dear. Ultimately, your responsibility. I'm still trying to untangle the mental gymnastics it must have taken to land on that logic. Go ahead and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because the way this story spirals, you won't believe it. Things get more chaotic than a toddler let loose in a candy store with a stolen credit card. It all started pretty uneventfully, if anything involving an HOA can ever be described that way. I'd moved into the exclusive Oakwood Estates about a year earlier, lured by the serene streets and generously sized garages. As someone who lives and breathes performance vehicles, that space was a deal sealer. I'm a retired software architect, and after decades of wrestling with code, I found peace in the mechanical precision of high-end cars. My Lamborghini HOA Evo, finished in Verdmantis green, was the crown jewel of my collection, a personal reward for years spent battling logic gates and impossible deadlines. It wasn't just a car, it was art, it was engineering poetry, and yes, it did draw attention, which, as I soon learned, was a problem for certain people, especially for Karen. Now, her real name might have been something like Susan, but Karen just suited her too perfectly, like a designer blazer tailored one size too small. She ruled Oakwood Estates like a suburban monarch, clipboard in hand, issuing citations like royal decrees. Her vehicle of choice, a spotless white Range Rover, the kind that silently announces, "I judge your landscaping." She usually wore a pricey athleisure that looked more showroom than sweat-stained, and her face seemed permanently etched with faint disapproval, as if everything around her constantly fell short of her impossibly high standards. My first run-in with her was minor and almost laughable, a notice for leaving my trash bins visible from the street an hour past the deadline. I just rolled my eyes, wheeled them in, and chalked it up as the cost of living among perfectly edged lawns. Little did I know, that was only the overture to a symphony of nonsense. For some reason, my Lamborghini really got under her skin. I didn't show it off. It stayed parked in my garage, taken out only for weekend drives or car meets. I kept it quiet and respectful, but the moment my garage door opened and that gleaming green machine came into view, her nose wrinkled like I'd committed a moral offense. More than once, I caught her glaring at it during her strolls through the neighborhood, her disapproval almost tangible. One afternoon, while I was detailing it, she approached under the pretense of discussing mailbox paint colors, but her eyes kept darting toward the HOA N. Quite the conspicuous choice for such a peaceful neighborhood, isn't it, Mr. Henderson? She said, her voice tipped in syrupy condescension. I smiled politely. It makes me happy, Karen, and believe it or not, it's nearly silent when I obey the speed limit. Her lips tightened, and from that point forward, I knew I'd earned a permanent spot on her radar. The night it all went south, I was out of town for a tech conference. Out of habit more than necessity, really. My house was locked up tight, alarms armed, the usual precautions in place. The Lamborghini was safely tucked into its bay in my 3-car garage, under a cover and connected to a trickle charger. My neighbor, Arthur, a kind older gentleman, had a spare key to the house in case of emergencies, but he'd never touch the cars. Then came the call. Arthur rang me at some dreadful hour, his voice trembling. Mark, you need to come back, something's happened to your green car." My heart sank. What do you mean something happened? There's been an incident. It's bad. The police are here. It's totaled. Mark, really totaled? I froze. How? It was locked in my garage. Arthur didn't have many answers, just that the car had somehow ended up a few blocks away, wrapped around a telephone pole, and a young man was involved. That young man, I soon found out, was Karen's pride and joy, Kevin. Kevin was 17, tall and awkward with a cocky grin that mirrored his mother's smirk. His reputation in the neighborhood was anything but admirable. He was the type of kid people described as just misunderstood, even as he vandalized property and swiped candy bars from corner stores. I packed up and made the 2-hour drive back, simmering with disbelief and fury. The conference was forgotten. All I could think about was my Lamborghini and my beautiful machinima ruined. And when I finally arrived, it was even worse than Arthur had warned. The vibrant green was barely visible beneath the wreckage. Crumpled panels, shattered glass, blown airbags. It looked like the aftermath of a battle between titans. The front was obliterated, one wheel had broken free, and the once sleek profile was now a grotesque sculpture of twisted metal. Police lights flashed, casting eerie shadows over the destruction. A weary-looking officer, Sergeant Miller, gave me the rundown. Apparently, Kevin thought my Lamborghini would make the ultimate joyride to impress his friends. He had somehow broken into my garage, found the valet key hidden in what I thought was a secure lockbox, and took off. Even now, the thought of it turns my stomach. I always imagined that if my Lamborghini HOA Karen ever met an untimely demise, it would be with me behind the wheel and maybe on a private track, pushing the limits just a hair too far. What I never anticipated was it being turned into twisted scrap metal by a zit-faced teenager trying to impress his equally clueless buddies. Even worse, that teenager turned out to be the son of our nightmare HOA President Karen. And just when I thought things couldn't get more surreal, Karen, in all her puffed-up, self-righteous grandeur, actually had the nerve to insist that I cover the damages. Her reasoning? It's your car, dear. Ultimately, your responsibility. I'm still trying to untangle the mental gymnastics it must have taken to land on that logic. Go ahead and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because the way this story spirals, you won't believe it. Things get more chaotic than a toddler let loose in a candy store with a stolen credit card. It all started pretty uneventfully, if anything involving an HOA can ever be described that way. I'd moved into the exclusive Oakwood Estates about a year earlier, lured by the serene streets and generously sized garages. As someone who lives and breathes performance vehicles, that space was a deal sealer. I'm a retired software architect, and after decades of wrestling with code, I found peace in the mechanical precision of high-end cars. My Lamborghini HOA Karen, finished in Manda's green, was the crown jewel of my collection, a personal reward for years spent battling logic gates and impossible deadlines. It wasn't just a car, it was art, it was engineering poetry, and yes, it did draw attention, which, as I soon learned, was a problem for certain people, especially for Karen. Now, her real name might have been something like Susan, but Karen just suited her too perfectly, like a designer blazer tailored one size too small. She ruled Oakwood Estates like a suburban monarch, clipboard in hand, issuing citations like royal decrees. Her vehicle of choice, a spotless white Range Rover, the kind that silently announces, "I judge your landscaping." She usually wore a pricey athleisure that looked more showroom than sweat-stained, and her face seemed permanently etched with faint disapproval, as if everything around her constantly fell short of her impossibly high standards. My first run-in with her was minor and almost laughable, a notice for leaving my trash bins visible from the street an hour past the deadline. I just rolled my eyes, wheeled them in, and chalked it up as the cost of living among perfectly edged lawns. Little did I know, that was only the overture to a symphony of nonsense. For some reason, my Lamborghini really got under her skin. I didn't show it off. It stayed parked in my garage, taken out only for weekend drives or car meets. I kept it quiet and respectful, but the moment my garage door opened and that gleaming green machine came into view, her nose wrinkled like I'd committed a moral offense. More than once, I caught her glaring at it during her strolls through the neighborhood, her disapproval almost tangible. One afternoon, while I was detailing it, she approached under the pretense of discussing mailbox paint colors, but her eyes kept darting toward the HOA Karen. Quite the conspicuous choice for such a peaceful neighborhood, isn't it, Mr. Henderson? She said, her voice tipped in syrupy condescension. I smiled politely. It makes me happy, Karen, and believe it or not, it's nearly silent when I obey the speed limit. Her lips tightened, And from that point forward, I knew I'd earned a permanent spot on her radar. The night it all went south, I was out of town for a tech conference. Out of habit more than necessity, really. My house was locked up tight, alarms armed, the usual precautions in place. The Lamborghini was safely tucked into its bay in my 3-car garage, under a cover and connected to a trickle charger. My neighbor, Arthur, a kind older gentleman, had a spare key to the house in case of emergencies, but he'd never touch the cars. Then came the call. Arthur rang me at some dreadful hour, his voice trembling. Mark, you need to come back, something's happened. To your green car." My heart sank. "What do you mean something happened?" "There's been an incident. It's bad. The police are here. It's totaled." "Mark, really totaled?" I froze. "How?" "It was locked in my garage." Arthur didn't have many answers, just that the car had somehow ended up a few blocks away, wrapped around a telephone pole, and a young man was involved. That young man, I soon found out, was Karen's pride and joy, Kevin. Kevin was 17, tall and awkward with a cocky grin that mirrored his mother's smirk. His reputation in the neighborhood was anything but admirable. He was the type of kid people described as just misunderstood, even as he vandalized property and swiped candy bars from corner stores. I packed up and made the 2-hour drive back, simmering with disbelief and fury. The conference was forgotten. All I could think about was my Lamborghini and my beautiful machinima ruined. And when I finally arrived, it was even worse than Arthur had warned. The vibrant green was barely visible beneath the wreckage. Crumpled panels, shattered glass, blown airbags. It looked like the aftermath of a battle between titans. The front was obliterated, one wheel had broken free, and the once sleek profile was now a grotesque sculpture of twisted metal. Police lights flashed, casting eerie shadows over the destruction. A weary-looking officer, Sergeant Miller, gave me the rundown. Apparently, Kevin thought my Lamborghini would make the ultimate joyride to impress his friends. He had somehow broken into my garage, found the valet key hidden in what I thought was a secure lockbox, and took off. Even now, the thought of it turns my stomach. "Discreetly, of course," Karen continued, lowering her voice as if offering a favor. "We don't want Kevin's future ruined over a youthful indiscretion. Maybe you could even tell the police it was all a misunderstanding, that you let him borrow it." I just stared at her. The silence stretched between us, heavy and tense. Gary shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing he could melt into the pavement. When I finally spoke, my voice was glacial. "Let me get this straight, Karen. Your son steals my Lamborghini, crashes it beyond repair, and you want me to pay for the damages and lie to the police to cover for him?" Karen gave a curt nod, lips curled into a satisfied smirk like she just proposed a logical business arrangement. "Precisely. It's the sensible thing to do. Think of it as a broken bar community contribution. It keeps everything harmonious." I actually laughed. "A short, sharp, humorless sound." "Karen," I said, voice low and deadly calm, "you are delusional." "Absolutely, certifiably delusional. Not only will I not be paying a single cent for the destruction your delinquent son caused, but I will be pressing charges to the fullest extent of the law. And as for your suggestion that I lie to the police, that's obstruction of justice. Also a felony. I'd advise you to consult an attorney before you open your mouth again." Her smug expression vanished, replaced by fury. "How dare you? We are pillars of this community. Kevin is a good boy. You with your flashy car and your snobbish attitude, you're the problem." She was shrieking now, spittle flying. "You'll be hearing from our lawyer. You'll regret this, Mr. Henderson. We'll sue you for emotional distress, for endangering a minor with your automotive hazard." Gary finally managed to speak, his voice a soft, nervous squeak. "Karen, dear, perhaps we should quiet, Gary," she snapped, not even glancing at him. She turned her full fury back on me. Her eyes were wild. "This isn't over, Henderson, not by a long shot. People like you always get what's coming." And with that, she spun on her heel, nearly knocking Gary aside, and stormed back to her Range Rover, slamming the door hard enough to make my windows rattle. I stood there, watching them drive away, momentarily stunned by the sheer absurdity of it all. Then, slowly, cold resolve settled in. This was no longer just about a wrecked car. This was about principle, about accountability. Karen had just declared war. Andy, a man who had built a career on logic, systems, and precision, was more than ready to meet her on the battlefield. My next call, after the insurance company, would be to the best litigation attorney I knew. This wasn't neighborhood drama anymore. This was full-scale suburban warfare. Karen's demands weren't just entitled, they were outright hostile. She genuinely believed she could bully her way out of consequences, and even more outrageously, that she could offload the financial burden onto me. Her attractive nuisance argument that my locked Lamborghini was somehow responsible for her son's crime essay was so absurd it almost deserved applause for creativity. But rage alone wasn't a strategy. I needed to be smart, surgical, just like debugging a complex software failure. Step 1. Protect myself. I called my insurance provider again and briefed them on Karen's little visit and her wildly skewed view of liability. The claims adjuster, Sarah, seasoned professional, listened carefully. "Mr. Henderson," she said reassuringly, "her claims are completely baseless. Your policy fully covers theft and vandalism. We'll be pursuing Kevin and his parents for full restitution, including your deductible, through subrogation. Her suggestion that you pay is laughable, legally speaking." That gave me some relief. Sarah also advised me to keep meticulous records of every conversation, every message. "People like that," she said with weary experience, "have a tendency to make things very messy, even when they're obviously wrong." Smart advice. Next, I dialed Eleanor Vance. Ellie was a litigator I'd worked with before, as sharp as a scalpel, ruthless in court, and allergic to nonsense. She was exactly who I needed. I laid it all out: the theft, the crash, Karen's galling demands. She was silent for a few moments after I finished, and I could almost hear her mind processing it all. Then she let out a dry, dangerous chuckle. "Mark," she said, "this woman sounds like a walking lawsuit. Attractive nuisance, for a car in a locked garage, demanding you pay for the damage her thieving son caused to your stolen property. This is gold. Pure, legally suicidal gold." Her laugh was contagious. For the first time in hours, I felt my tension ease slightly. "So what's our move, Ellie?" "We play it smart," she said. "First, full cooperation with the police. We want Kevin prosecuted all the way. Grand Theft Auto is no joke. Second, let your insurance company take the lead on the claim. They have the tools and muscle. We just monitor everything closely." She paused. "And third, this is the fun part, we prepare for Karen's inevitable counterattack. She already threatened to sue you for emotional distress and endangering a minor. Let her try. We'll counter with harassment, defamation if she mouths off publicly, and possibly intentional infliction of emotional distress on you." Before we hung up, Ellie added one more thing: beef up your home security. If the son's bold enough to steal a Lamborghini, and the mother's this unhinged, you want eyes on everything, 24/7, cover every angle, document everything. My old security setup was decent, but decent wasn't enough anymore. Within days, I had a top-tier, state-of-the-art surveillance system installed. High-resolution cameras now covered every approach, the driveway, garage entrance, street frontage, even the backyard. No blind spots. Everything was recorded, monitored, and secured. I also began logging every interaction, and no matter how small, with Karen, Kevin, or any member of the HOA board. If this was going to turn into a legal war, I was going to be armed with evidence. Arthur, my neighbor and longtime gardening enthusiast, quickly became an unexpected but invaluable ally. He'd seen Kevin lurking around my property several times in the weeks leading up to the theft. Always looked shifty. That one, Arthur muttered, gave me a bad feeling. Wish I'd said something. His observations might not have been a smoking gun, but they helped paint a picture of premeditation, and he was more than happy to give a formal statement to the police and to Ellie. Meanwhile, Kevin was back home, out on bail, much to my disgust, thanks to his parents scraping together the funds. He was supposedly under house arrest or a curfew, though the neighborhood rumor mill, powered by gossip and loose-lipped teens, suggested he was anything but remorseful. If anything, he seemed to be enjoying the attention. A tech-savvy friend of Ellie's managed to dig through Kevin's supposedly private social media. Teenagers, as it turns out, are terrible at covering their digital tracks. The account was a gold mine, cryptic posts alluding to doing something epic, congratulatory comments from friends, and worst of all, a smug selfie posted just hours before the theft, captioned, "About to do something legendary, YOLO." Ellie's contact archived everything. Kevin was burying himself and Karen was handing him the shovel. And speaking of Karen, she didn't stay quiet for long. A few days later, I received an official-looking envelope from the Oakwood Estates HOA. Not a bill for my destroyed Lamborghini thankfully, but something almost as insulting, a violation notice for my lawn. According to the letter, a patch of grass near the sidewalk was a quarter-inch too tall. The notice included a blurry photo clearly snapped from inside Karen's Range Rover and a stern warning that daily fines would begin in 24 hours if the issue wasn't corrected. The sheer pettiness was staggering. My car had been stolen and totaled by her son, and now she was coming after me for lawn maintenance. This was no longer just revenge. It was a coordinated campaign of harassment. I documented the violation in detail, photographed my perfectly manicured lawn from every angle and sent a registered, formal letter in response. Ellie helped draft it. It was polite, pointed, and CC'd to the entire HOA board. I stated that the violation was baseless, appeared retaliatory, and reminded them of the active criminal investigation involving the HOA president's household. Karen had declared war, and I was done playing nice. She clearly thought she could wear me down and harass me into silence. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't just some wealthy guy with a flashy car. I was a systems architect, a man trained to spot flaws and dismantle them, piece by piece. Karen and her weaponized HOA were just another broken system begging to be debugged. The lawn citation was only the beginning. Over the following weeks, a steady stream of similarly absurd notices began showing up in my mailbox. One claimed my mailbox's paint was too faded to meet HOA standards despite the fact that it had been repainted less than a year ago and looked pristine. Another cited a faint discoloration on the driveway paver barely visible unless you were on your hands and knees with a magnifying glass. Each notice was logged, photographed, and countered with meticulously written responses. Ellie reviewed every one. We made sure each reply highlighted the retaliatory nature of these complaints in light of the pending charges against her son. Karen wasn't enforcing HOA rules as she was abusing them. Ellie was particularly intrigued by that. "If she's doing this to you, Mark," she told me during one of our strategy sessions, "chances are she's done it to others. Or worse, she's misusing HOA funds." This is a common pattern with neighborhood tyrants. That opened a new front in our war. While the primary goal remained holding Kevin accountable for the theft, dismantling Karen's stranglehold on the HOA was quickly becoming a very appealing secondary mission. If she was willing to harass me over a blade of grass, what else might she be hiding? I began quietly speaking with my neighbors, casually at first, but gradually shifting the conversations to their experiences with Karen and the HOA. Arthur was already on my side, but others began to open up once they saw I wasn't just another homeowner rolling over. The stories came pouring out. One neighbor, a soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Lechtavis, told me Karen had forced her to repaint her front door 3 times because the shade of blue didn't quite match the community palette. She'd spent hundreds and was left emotionally drained. Another neighbor recounted how his request to install a small, discreet solar panel, something actively encouraged by city regulations, had been denied repeatedly by Karen, with no justification. He later found out Karen's brother-in-law owned a competing local energy company. It was clear, Karen wasn't just petty, she was corrupt. And now, I had a new mission. The neighbor with the solar panel denial later discovered the truth. The roofing company Karen had recommended didn't even do solar installations and had lost a bid to work on his roof just the year before. What emerged was a damning portrait of an HOA president treating the community like her own private fiefdom. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was abusing power to punish enemies, reward allies, and enrich anyone in her inner circle. This had gone far beyond my stolen car. It was now about just IC, and not just for me, but for the entire neighborhood. Meanwhile, the investigation into Kevin was moving forward. His early bravado was reportedly fading fast as the full weight of the charges hit him. Grand theft auto of a vehicle valued over $100,000, felony reckless endangerment, and more. Then came a breakthrough. Ellie's tech contact, working under a court warrant, managed to recover deleted texts from Kevin's phone, and they were explosive. In them, Kevin not only bragged about planning to steal my Lamborghini, but wrote that his mom wouldn't care. In fact, he believed she'd find it funny, especially if it brought that show-off Henderson down a notch. It was damning. The messages suggested Karen may have known about the theft in advance, or at the very least, fostered a household environment where criminal behavior went unpunished, even encouraged. When I told Ellie, her eyes lit up. This might elevate Karen's liability, she said thoughtfully. Not just as a negligent parent but possibly as an accessory, or at least a civil co-defendant. We'll have to be careful. But this changes things. We handed the messages over to the detective leading the case. He seemed unsurprised or worn down, even by Karen's relentless attempts to call his office, demanding her son's innocence and accusing the police of harassing her good boy. Karen, still blissfully unaware of how serious things had become, continued her campaign of petty war. She escalated again. This time, she claimed I had made unauthorized landscaping modifications because I replaced a dying rose bush with a healthier one of the same type. She even argued that my new security cameras violated HOA aesthetic guidelines, despite at least half a dozen other homes sporting nearly identical setups. Each complaint was swatted down with firm, legal replies. Ellie crafted the responses using the HOA's own bylaws, often highlighting inconsistencies in enforcement and exposing the obviously retaliatory nature of Karen's claims. Karen's frustration was visible. I'd often see her drive slowly past my house, her expression tight and bitter behind the wheel of her usually gleaming Range Rover. Lately, even the vehicle looked slightly neglected, as if her obsession with tormenting me had begun to erode her control over her own carefully cultivated image. One afternoon, as I was retrieving the mail, she finally confronted me. "You think you're so clever, don't you, Mr. Henderson?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "With your fancy lawyer and your smug letters. But you won't win. We're the HOA. We make the rules." I smiled calmly. "Actually, Karen," I replied, "the members of the HOA make the rules, and I suspect more than a few of them are growing tired of how those rules are being, let's say, selectively enforced." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" "Not at all," I said, my tone measured. "Just stating a fact. Transparency and accountability are powerful things, don't you think?" Then I turned and walked away, leaving her fuming at the mailboxes. Karen's heavy-handed tactics were backfiring. Her efforts to isolate me were instead rallying quiet resistance. Neighbors who had long suffered under her reign were beginning to speak out. The upcoming annual home meeting, usually a boring, perfunctory event where Karen rubber-stamped her agenda, was starting to look like a turning point. Ellie and I began strategizing, not just to defend against Karen's attacks, but to go on the offensive. To remove her. What began as personal restitution was turning into something bigger. Systemic reform. And it felt good. The meeting was scheduled for a month after the first wave of violation notices. In years past, it would have been lightly attended. Karen would drone on about budget figures, and her compliant board would nod and approve every motion. Not this year. Ellie, with her legal acumen, drafted several motions and resolutions. Among them, a formal proposal for an independent audit of the HOA's finances going back 3 years, prompted by Mrs. Lechtovis's story and rumors of inflated administrative costs. A call to standardize enforcement of HOA violations, eliminating arbitrary fines and ensuring every resident was treated fairly. And most boldly, a motion for a vote of no confidence in Karen as HOA president. That last one was a gamble. But we believed the undercurrent of discontent had grown strong enough to make it viable. My role was to build support. Night after night, I met with neighbors, sharing my experiences, listening to theirs. What I heard confirmed everything we suspected. Arbitrary rule changes, vindictive enforcement, constant stress. I began compiling a dossier, copies of Karen's violation notices against me, juxtaposed with photos of identical or worse infractions on the properties of her Eliasa left completely unpunished. What Karen didn't realize was that, in trying to bury me with bureaucracy, she'd handed me the shovel she'd soon trip over. I included photos showing blatant violations at the homes of Karen's borderline infractions that went completely unaddressed. Alongside them were signed statements from Mrs. Davis, Arthur, and several other residents, each describing their own negative encounters with Karen's abusive leadership. We also incorporated Kevin's recovered social media posts, and those damning text messages are the ones suggesting Karen may have known about or even condoned his plan to steal the Lamborghini. It wasn't just about Karen's unfitness for office anymore. It was a case of serious ethical compromise and a potential conflict of interest to her son facing felony charges involving another home member. Meanwhile, the police investigation was reaching a turning point. Armed with clear evidence of premeditation, the theft, and the destruction of an extremely high-value vehicle, the district attorney's office was preparing to formally indict Kevin on multiple felony counts. This wasn't, as Karen had desperately insisted, a youthful mistake. It was grand theft auto, reckless endangerment, a crime with real consequences. My insurance company had also declared that and a total loss. To their credit, they moved swiftly, though we were still negotiating the final settlement. They'd also launched subrogation proceedings to recover their payout and my deductibly by filing against Kevin and, by extension, Karen and Gary as his legal guardians. The financial pressure was mounting, all of it brought on by Karen's own actions. Still, she seemed to believe she could control the narrative. 1 week before the home meeting, she circulated a glossy, self-congratulatory newsletter to the entire community. It portrayed Oakwood Estates as a flawless suburban haven thanks, of course, to her tireless leadership. Buried in the middle was a thinly veiled swipe at disruptive individuals undermining community unity with frivolous complaints. It was clearly aimed at me and anyone else brave enough to question her authority, but instead of intimidating us, it fueled our resolve. The evening of the home meeting arrived. The clubhouse, usually half empty during these tedious events, was packed wall to wall. The air buzzed with nervous energy and anticipation. I spotted Arthur, who gave me a subtle thumbs up, and Mrs. Davis, who offered a quiet, encouraging smile. Karen sat at the front with her usual sycophantic board members, a visibly anxious treasurer, and a secretary who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Karen's face was taut with unease. She tried to mask it, raising her voice louder than usual, forcing smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes, and banging the gavel to call the meeting to order with artificial confidence. She wore what I could only describe as an attempt at power dressing, a stiff navy blue suit that resembled a uniform, accented with a thick gold necklace that screamed overcompensation. She launched into her typical speech, rattling on about property values and maintaining our exclusive standards. But this time, her words didn't land. The crowd wasn't nodding, they were restless, skeptical. Then she opened the floor for new business. Ellie, standing tall and composed, stepped forward. She had registered as my proxy. "Madam President, members of the HOA," she began, her voice crisp and commanding, "I am Eleanor Vance, legal counsel representing Mr. Mark Henderson. We have several items of new business to present." Karen's lips tightened. "Lawyers, really, Mr. Henderson? Is this necessary?" she asked, trying to sound dismissive, but the quiver in her voice betrayed her fear. "Given recent events, Madam President, and the concerns of numerous residents, yes, it is," Ellie replied coldly. She then laid everything out. First, a motion for an independent audit of the HOA's finances over the past 3 years justified by rising fees and irregular budget allocations. Second, a revision of violation enforcement procedures, aimed at ending arbitrary or retaliatory fines. And finally, a motion for a vote of no confidence in Karen's leadership. For each point, Ellie presented evidence of retaliatory fines, documentation of selective rule enforcement, and sworn statements from fellow residents. Then came the bombshell. She mentioned Kevin's text messages as the ones implying Karen either ignored or encouraged the theft of my car. A collective gasp echoed through the room. "Those are lies, fabrications," Karen sputtered. "My son would never, I would never." Ellie remained composed. "The evidence will speak for itself, Madam President." I stood next. "My name is Mark Henderson," I said, steady and clear. "Many of you know about my car. What you may not know is that after Karen's son stole and destroyed it, Karen herself came to my home. She demanded I pay for the damages and even asked me to lie to the police. Gasps. When I refused, she launched a campaign of harassment to fines for things that didn't exist, bogus violations. Here, I said, holding up documents, are her notices. And here are the corresponding photos of my perfectly maintained lawn, mailbox, and landscaping. Now look at fussy photos of violations at the homes of board members, ones that have gone ignored for months, even years. The room stirred at people whispering, nodding, exchanging knowing glances. Karen's carefully curated image was unraveling fast, just as she seemed ready to explode to shout me down as the clubhouse doors opened. Two uniformed officers stepped inside. Behind them was Sergeant Miller. The room fell silent. He walked calmly to the front and addressed Karen directly. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady. "Karen, last name. We have a warrant for your arrest." A collective intake of breath swept through the crowd. Karen stood frozen, her mouth hanging open, eyes wide with disbelief. "Arrest? For what?" she stammered. "Obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and potentially accessory after the fact to grand theft auto based on new evidence," Sergeant Miller said. He turned slightly. "We also have a warrant for Kevin, last name made for additional charges involving witness intimidation. He's being taken into custody as we speak." One of the officers stepped forward. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us." Karen looked around wildly, eyes landing on her husband Gary, who looked ready to faint. Her bored allies stared at their shoes, unwilling to meet her gaze. There was no one left in Karen's corner. Her reign didn't end with a bang, but with the quiet, metallic click of handcuffs. As the officers led a sputtering, protesting Karen out of the clubhouse, the room didn't erupt in cheers, not at first. What came instead was a stunned silence, followed by a collective exhale of relief, then, a rising hum of excited voices. The takedown had gone even more spectacularly than I had imagined. Ellie caught my eye, offering a subtle nod and a faint, knowing smile. It wasn't just the text messages that had sealed Karen's fate. It was her own arrogance, her brazen manipulation, and, most of all, the courage of an entire community finally standing up to her. It had all built to this moment, a public reckoning that felt not just necessary, but just. And yet, the home meeting wasn't over. In many ways, it was only beginning. Now that Karen was gone, the real work of rebuilding what she had torn down, it could finally start. Watching her being led out of the building in handcuffs from her own home meeting, it was, I'll admit, a moment of dark satisfaction. It wasn't just about the Lamborghini anymore, or the bogus violations, or even her outrageous demand that I lie to the police. It was about accountability, the simple, long overdue idea that no one is above the rules. The room buzzed with activity. Gary, her husband, looked dazed, muttering apologies to no one in particular before quietly slipping out, likely headed to find a bail bondsman. The remaining board members, including the perpetually scowling secretary and the shell-shocked treasurer, looked utterly lost. They had hitched themselves to a sinking ship and now they were left adrift. Then Arthur stood up. "Well," he said, his voice carrying a new strength, "it seems we've got a vacancy for president and a lot of work to do." That simple declaration broke the tension. Conversation sparked everywhere. People who had once been silent were now exchanging ideas, sharing frustrations, and more importantly being heard. Ellie, ever the pragmatist, stepped in to restore some structure. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said calmly, "while tonight has certainly been dramatic, we still have pressing business. I suggest we begin by electing an interim president and setting a date for a special board election." Her sensible tone grounded the room and her proposal was met with enthusiastic approval. Mrs. Davies, the quiet, dignified woman who had been forced to repaint her front door multiple times under Karen's petty enforcement, was nominated and, to her astonishment, overwhelmingly elected interim president. Tears welled in her eyes as the community applauded. It was poetic justice. The very people Karen had tried to silence were now stepping forward to lead. One by one, the motions Ellie and I had prepared were brought to the floor and passed with near unanimous support. A full forensic audit of HOA finances was approved on the spot. The enforcement of violations was immediately suspended, pending a full review by a newly formed oversight committee, one I volunteered to help advise. putting my analytical skills to work. The entire mood in the clubhouse had shifted. It felt lighter, liberated. As for Karen and Kevin, their troubles were only beginning. Kevin still faced serious felony charges for the theft and destruction of my car. On top of that, new charges were being added: a witness intimidation stemming from threats he'd made to a friend who had agreed to cooperate with the police. Karen's arrest, meanwhile, stemmed from obstruction of justice and tampering with a witness, namely, me. Her attempts to coerce me into lying, followed by her calculated campaign of fines and harassment, had been enough for the DA to act. The deleted messages from Kevin's phone hinting that she may have known about or condoned the theft were now the focus of a broader investigation for possible conspiracy or accessory charges. The image they had so carefully cultivated, a respectable family, pillars of the community, was shattered. Their reputations lay in ruins, and the legal bills were just beginning to pile up. Meanwhile, my insurance company, emboldened by the clear evidence of wrongdoing, was aggressively pursuing its subrogation claim against the entire family of Kevin, Karen, and Gary for the full value of the HOA N, my deductible, and every related cost. The Verde Mantis HOA N never was gone, a devastating loss. But in its destruction, something remarkable had happened. The rot had been exposed, the grip of intimidation and dysfunction broken, and in its place, something better was taking root. Oakwood Estates began to heal. Just as Ellie had predicted, the forensic audit uncovered a hornet's nest of financial misconduct. The scope of Karen's abuse of power was staggering. She had siphoned HOA funds for personal indulgence, lavish dinners, inflated consulting fees paid to a shell company owned by her brother-in-law, even maintenance costs for her Range Rover, disguised under the vague label of administrative vehicle services. The revelations led to additional criminal charges for embezzlement. As it turned out, the Lamborghini debacle had barely scratched the surface of her grift. Under Mrs. Davis's interim leadership and with renewed energy from one silenced residents, the HOA began a full-scale overhaul of its bylaws and operations. Transparency became more than a promise, it became the norm. Meetings were well attended, productive, and focused on genuine community issues instead of power plays or vendettas. The mood in the neighborhood shifted. People talked again, really talked. The fear Karen had instilled was gone, replaced with something far more powerful: trust. As for me, I eventually replaced the HOA N with a Porsche 911 Turbo, this time in chalk gray. Sleek, elegant, still a head-turner, but just understated enough not to tempt fate. I also installed an upgraded security system, though I doubted I need it. Kevin, after all, wasn't going anywhere fast. He was convicted on multiple felony counts and sentenced to juvenile detention, followed by probation and hundreds of hours of community service. His dreams of becoming a legend behind the wheel were over, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale told in whispers around the neighborhood. Karen, faced with overwhelming evidence and mounting legal pressure, took a plea deal. She avoided prison but was sentenced to extensive probation, ordered to pay significant restitution, and permanently barred from holding any leadership role in any community association, anywhere. Her fire from self-appointed queen to disgraced fellow was complete, and very, very public. Gary divorced her shortly after the dust settled, reportedly done with the drama, the debt, and the destruction she left in her wake. Last I heard, Karen was working a low-wage retail job in a different town. Her designer wardrobe and luxury SUV were long gone, a far cry from the power-drunk tyrant who once insisted I should pay for her son's rampage. Sometimes, when I'm outside polishing the Porsche, I think back on the whole surreal ordeal. The sheer audacity of Karen and Kevin still boggles my mind. But more than that, I think about what came after, not just my own vindication, but the real, lasting changes that came to the community. It's proof that sometimes even a quiet, retired software architect can be pushed far enough to take a stand against suburban tyranny, and with a little logic, a lot of determination, and one very good lawyer, a broken bar, you can actually win. Sure, it cost me a Lamborghini, but it brought peace, accountability, and fairness back to Oakwood Estates. And honestly, that's a trade I can live with. So, What's the wildest HO story you've ever heard? Drop it in the comments, and if this roller coaster ride kept you hooked, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell, because next time you broken bar, the nuisance might just be the one signing your violation letters. Thanks for watching.